Shortly before midday on the 12th of September 1907, Bertram Shaw arrived home to this house in St. Paul's Road in Camden Town. He was returning from his night job on the Midland Railway. He went upstairs to the apartment he shared with his wife, Phyllis, but to his surprise he found the door was locked. He obtained a duplicate key from his landlady, and in her company he returned to the apartment, where he unlocked and opened the door. The parlour had been ransacked. Drawers had been opened and their contents strewn over the floor. The door to the bedroom was locked, and now, thoroughly alarmed, Bert Shaw broke in the door. On the bed lay his wife Phyllis, naked and with her head almost severed from her body by a deep wound to her throat. She had been dead for some hours. Shaw surveyed the scene and noted that a postcard album lay open in the bedroom rather than in the parlour where it was normally kept, and some of its contents were scattered around. A quick search of the room revealed that a gold watch, a cigarette case, and a purse and chain were missing, but that 2 gold rings had been left on the chest of drawers, quite visible and undisturbed. In the parlour, the remains of a meal for 2 on the table suggested that his wife had had company the previous evening. Shaw's mother had arrived at the house on a visit a short time before this discovery was made, and he now had the unenviable task of informing her that the dead woman was not, in fact, his wife, but a 23-year-old prostitute whose name was Emily Dimmock. He had known Dimmock, who was called Phyllis by her friends, for almost 3 years, and in coming to live with him, it seems there had been an understanding between them that she would stop working as a prostitute. Quite unknown to Shaw, whose work as a dining car cook on the Midland Railway kept him away from home most nights, Phyllis Dimmock had continued her work as a prostitute under cover of his absence. The attending police surgeon examined the scene and body at 1 p.m. He noted the enormous quantity of blood lost by the victim, and determined that she had been killed by a severe wound to the neck, delivered by a sharp knife which had been wielded with considerable force. From the body's condition, he estimated that death had occurred between 4 and 6 a.m. that morning. The body was removed by 1:30 p.m., and police inquiries established that Shaw had left Phyllis on the previous afternoon at 4 p.m. as usual, to catch the train to Sheffield. In the early evening, Phyllis was seen in the kitchen with curling pins in her hair, and at approximately 8:15 p.m. the landlady heard her leave the house. Police were able to confirm Shaw's alibi, which was sufficient to clear him of any possible involvement in the murder. They also learned from her friends that Phyllis habitually brought clients back to the apartment during the night, and that they would leave before morning. Most of these clients she met at a pub in Camden Town called the Rising Sun. The police also discovered that a man named Robert Percival Roberts, a ship's cook on shore leave, had spent the Sunday, Monday and Tuesday nights with Phyllis, but not the Wednesday, because he said she was otherwise engaged for the night. Robert's alibi for the Wednesday night was, like Shaw's, beyond question, but Roberts gave police their first major lead. He told them that on the Wednesday morning before he left the apartment, Phyllis had received 2 letters, and that she had shown one of them to him. He recollected that it read, "Dear Phyllis, will you meet me at the Eagle, Camden Town, 8:30 tonight, Wednesday, Bert." According to Roberts, she then took a postcard from a chest of drawers and showed it to him. It was of a woman and child, and on the rear was written, "Phyllis, darling, if it pleases you, meet me at 8:15 p.m. at the..." And here there was a diagram of a sunrise. "Yours to a cinder, Alice." The handwriting on both the letter and postcard appeared to Roberts to be identical, and as she had shown them to him together, he naturally assumed they were written by the same person. Phyllis then burnt the letter and replaced the postcard in the drawer. A search by the police failed to uncover the postcard Roberts alluded to, but the ashes in the fireplace revealed some words and partial words which suggested that the contents of the letter were very much as Roberts indicated them to be. The trail went cold for several days until Bertram Shaw, packing his belongings to leave the apartment, discovered the missing postcard beneath a lining in a drawer. It was a major breakthrough. The police promptly released a facsimile of the postcard to the press, who duly reproduced it in their newspapers in the hope that someone somewhere would recognize the handwriting. 2 people did. Ruby Young, a prostitute who lived in Earl's Court, saw the postcard in the News of the World and instantly recognized the handwriting to be that of a 30-year-old artist whom she had been seeing for a couple of years until recently. His name was Robert Wood. Robert Wood had also seen the postcard, and he visited Ruby in some alarm. She confronted him with the newspaper cutting of the postcard, and he confirmed that it was his handwriting. But he had an explanation. He said that he had been approached by a woman in the bar of the Rising Sun the week before the murder, and as she had shown an interest in postcards, he had agreed to send one to her, and, apparently at her suggestion, he had signed it Alice. He recounted to Ruby how he had met her in Camden town by chance the following day, and that he had told her he would send her the card, which he then did. He said that he saw her subsequently at the Rising Sun again, where he chatted to her and had a few drinks before leaving, never to see her again. This was the extent of his relationship with the murdered woman, he said, and he implored Ruby not to betray him. Ruby Young agreed to remain silent. The other person who recognized the handwriting was a colleague of Wood's at the London Glass Works, where he worked as an engraver. He likewise confronted Wood, who told him the same story he had told Ruby Young, and asked him to keep quiet about it for fear of the effect it might have on his ailing father. The colleague, Jack Tinkman, liked Wood, accepted his explanation, and he too agreed to remain silent. Meanwhile, acquaintances of Phyllis, who were interviewed by the police, recalled seeing her with a young man whom they described as strange. This man had also been seen at various times with Phyllis on the 3 evenings prior to the murder, and a clear description of him emerged. He was approximately 30 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, had a long, thin face and sunken eyes, was dressed in a blue suit, and wore a bowler hat. According to one friend, a Mrs. Lawrence, Phyllis told her she did not like him at all. Another woman described Dimmock in company with this same man as being very nervous, as if she wanted to get away. Of even greater significance, an unemployed delivery man named Maguire, who awaited a friend in the vicinity, reported seeing a man leaving 29 St. Paul's Road at 12 minutes to 5 on the morning of the murder. He described the man as wearing an overcoat and a bowler hat, and although he didn't see the man's face, he noted a peculiar gait and movement of the shoulders as he walked down the street with one hand in his pocket. In spite of the descriptions of Phyllis's companion and the discovery of the postcard, the police were unable to identify the man. Robert Wood, however, was clearly apprehensive because he met with Ruby Young again and urged her that if questioned she should say she always met him on a Monday and Wednesday. He was very insistent on this, to the point where Ruby became irritated. Wood also visited a friend who worked as a bookseller who had seen Wood in company with Phyllis in the Eagle on the evening of the 11th of September, hours before the murder was committed, and asked him also to remain silent. Both had agreed to Wood's request. The major breakthrough for the police came on the 4th of October, when Ruby Young confided the matter of Wood's predicament to a friend. The friend, in turn, confided the matter to a journalist, who contacted Ruby, and thereafter Ruby Young contacted Scotland Yard. At 6:30 p.m. on the 4th of October, Robert Wood was arrested by Inspector Neal of Scotland Yard. He was identified in several police lineups as the man who had been seen on numerous occasions and in various places with Phyllis Dimmock for a period extending back 18 months prior to her murder. Of particular significance to the police was the fact that the delivery driver McGowan, who had seen the man leave the murder scene at 12 minutes to 5, was able to pick Wood out from a lineup unhesitatingly when he saw the men walk around the police yard. Wood gave the police a false alibi he had concocted with Ruby Young, and on the 6th of October he was formally charged with the murder of Phyllis Dimmock. The trial took place at the Old Bailey on the 12th of December 1907, amidst tremendous public interest, and the packed courthouse attracted luminaries of London society and the world of theatre. It seemed incontrovertible to the prosecution that Dimmock had had a long acquaintance with Wood, that he had made an assignation to meet him as a result of the letter seen by Roberts the previous morning, that she was at the Eagle pub on the evening before the murder in company with Wood, and that she had died between 4 and 6 a.m. in the morning, only a few hours later, and that a man answering Wood's description was seen leaving the house during this period. The Crown was confident it could prove its case against Wood. It is important to note that the peculiarity of the walk seen by the delivery driver McGowan had been mentioned by McGowan before any attention had been drawn to this characteristic of Wood's, and that it had enabled McGowan to pick out Wood unhesitatingly from a lineup. Others subsequently alluded to Wood's strange gait, and Ruby Young characterized it as a stiff way of walking involving a jerking movement of the shoulders. 2 police inspectors noted it too. Wood's father and brother gave evidence concerning a damaged left hand of which Wood was self-conscious and caused him to keep his hand in his pocket or to wear a glove, but they and other acquaintances denied there was anything peculiar about his walk. It was also of significance that the killer had clearly made prodigious efforts to find something in searching the apartment, and the postcard album seemed to have been the focus of his attentions. Indeed, the blinds had been partially opened to allow a little light into the room to assist the killer's search. It was obvious to the police from the beginning of their inquiries that robbery was not the motive because valuables were left behind. During the trial, Robert Wood was placed in the dock as a witness, which was unusual at the time, and he gave a very detailed account of his actions and a commentary on the evidence of witnesses against him. He denied most of the prosecution evidence, and frequently claimed he was unable to recall specific events and conversations, but otherwise he was articulate, well-spoken, and created a favourable impression. Throughout the trial he remained very calm, detached, and occupied himself by sketching the courtroom scene, the judge and principal characters and witnesses. Some of these sketches appeared in the press at the time. Although things looked black for Robert Wood from the point of view of the sheer volume of testimony against him, he had an ace in the pack. Large donations of money from his various supporters, including his employers, enabled him to retain the services of the greatest defence barrister of the early 20th century, Sir Edward Marshall Hall. Marshall Hall drew court attendances like a modern celebrity. He was a natural actor and a brilliant defence barrister. Marshall Hall attacked the prosecution case with great forensic skill. He imbued doubt into every piece of evidence, introduced uncertainty into the most solid of testimonies, and undermined the credibility of the prosecution witnesses one by one. In recognition of the seriousness of McGowan's evidence relating to his sighting of Wood leaving the murder scene at 12 to 5 a.m., he took great pains to neutralize this. He claimed the light in St. Paul Street was very poor. The weather conditions affected visibility. Even offered an alternative character, who was claimed to be in the vicinity at the time, and who had a peculiar walk. In short, he told the court that McGowan's identification of Wood was worthless. He likewise undermined the ship's cook, Roberts' evidence concerning the letter with its recollected assignation of Phyllis with a man named Bert, even suggesting Roberts himself had an unsatisfactory alibi for the night of the murder, and that he had invented the story of the letter. Ruby Young's testimony was attacked by reference to its irrelevance in terms of timing and to implications as to her motives and character. The other witnesses who claimed to have seen Wood in company with Phyllis Dimmock were likewise dismissed and disparaged by Marshall Hall by virtue of their seedy and salubrious characters and their belonging to a world of the demi-monde far removed from that of respectable society and from that of Robert Wood and his family. In contrast, he referred to the excellent character of Robert Wood and suggested that the crime was almost certainly that of a maniac, that Wood had lied in creating a false alibi not for his own sake, but to protect his father and brother, who would be shocked at his associations with the likes of Phyllis Dimmock, however innocent such associations may have been. At the end of the trial, the judge summed up the case and quite unexpectedly declared that, in his personal view, the prosecution had failed to prove its case. The jury accordingly returned a verdict of not guilty, and the courtroom, the West End, and all of London was brought to a standstill by the ensuing celebrations. Robert Wood was respectable and from a middle-class family, quite in contrast to those who testified against him. They were vilified in the press and the popular imagination. Ruby Young had to leave the court after the trial ended in disguise. So great was the public feeling against Robert Wood's antagonists. Robert Wood was freed, and his family, friends, and employers, as well as much of the country, celebrated his freedom. But there was disquiet at the verdict in some quarters, and the manner of its procurement on a tide of popular sentiment. Sir Edward Marshall Hall, at the time of the trial, said he had never doubted Robert Wood's innocence. Years later, his daughter said that he had changed his mind, but that he did not elaborate on why he had done so. As the trial receded in the public memory, and the characters were forgotten, no other credible suspect was uncovered in connection with the murder. No one else was so central in the narrative of Phyllis Dimmock's final days, and many legal voices returned to the question, was it possible that Robert Wood had in fact been guilty? The prosecution had depended on 5 points for the success of its case. Firstly, that Wood was on intimate terms with Dimmock for a substantial period before the events leading up to the murder. Secondly, that a letter was written by Woods arranging to meet Dimmock at the Eagle on Wednesday evening. Thirdly, that letter was the remnants found in the fireplace which Roberts gave witness to. Fourthly, that Wood had been in the company of Dimmock in the Eagle on the evening before the murder. And fifthly, that Wood had been seen by McGowan leaving Dimmock's house at 12 minutes to 5 on the morning of the murder. 4 independent witnesses, all unknown to each other, testified to the intimacy of Wood and Dimmock over an 18-month period prior to the murder, yet they were not believed. Wood admitted the postcard he sent to Dimmock was his, and that the charred papers in the grate contained his handwriting, although he disputed that they contained the assignation recalled by Roberts. He claimed that they contained sketches and aphorisms, but the only discernible words on the remains of the letter, ill, you, town, Wednesday, rest, excuse, good, accord strikingly with Roberts' testimony. Dear Phyllis, will you meet me in the bar of the Eagle at Camden Town, 8:30 tonight, Wednesday? Bert. Roberts supplied the evidence of the letter before the police had deciphered the contents of the ashes in the fireplace. Wood was in the Eagle on the night of the murder in company with Dimmock by his own admission and by the testimony of numerous witnesses, although he claimed that he had left there. McGowan's description of the peculiar gait of the man leaving 29 St. Paul's Road fitted Wood exactly. Others corroborated that characteristic walk of Wood. We know that Wood understood the importance of the postcard, and we know too that the killer had made considerable efforts to search the apartment for something, and that the postcard album had constituted a major focus of that search. It's now impossible, so many years after the event, to know exactly what happened. But if we accept the gist of the prosecution's evidence, which Marshall Hall so adeptly undermined, and which the newspapers so thoroughly distorted, we can see a pattern emerge. Wood was unquestionably attracted to a depraved lifestyle that was quite at odds with that of his family, with his work and his social background, where his conduct and character seemed excellent. Wood enjoyed a 2-year relationship with the prostitute Ruby Young, which declined when she moved to Earl's Court and ended when she encountered Wood with another woman. He had known Phyllis Dimmock for a period of 18 months and had been on intimate terms with her. It seems likely that he had been increasing his attentions towards her in the weeks prior to her death. The end of his relationship with Ruby Young and the increased sightings of him in Dimmock's company suggest it. The fact that he was seen with her on each of the 3 nights prior to her death underline this. It is entirely possible that these increasing attentions, including his chance meetings with her in Camden streets, various pubs, and even his own admissions regarding following her outside the Rising Sun on one occasion and observing her talking to a man, were becoming irksome to her. This may have been the origin, in fact, of her telling Mrs. Lawrence that she did not like him at all. Did she sense in his odd but gentle and persistent manner something more dangerous, some dark aspect to his character, which was suggested by the odd impression he engendered in many people? We cannot know, but it seems reasonable to assume that Phyllis Dimmock, in spite of her deceptions of her common-law husband Shaw, was quite content with her domestic arrangements. Members of Shaw's family have even said the purpose of his mother's visit on that occasion was to mend fences with Phyllis, and that this may have been a prelude to further steps towards regularizing their relationship. In any case, Phyllis's domestic arrangements would surely not welcome emotional attachments or the obsessive attentions of someone like Wood. All the accounts of Wood's behaviour towards Phyllis point to jealousy as the motive. For example, Richards testified that 2 nights before the murder, Robert Wood had recognised him as a man who had slept with Phyllis Dimmock and stared at him, and that he had returned the stare. Mrs. Lawrence said that Wood had called Dimmock outside and spoken to her for 10 minutes on one occasion, and when Dimmock was with Richards, she had observed Wood look in at the door of the Rising Sun. Their eyes had met, but neither had spoken. It seems highly likely that, having been in Phyllis's company on the evening of the 11th of September 1907, Wood returned with her to 29 St. Paul's Road. The two shared a meal, and a few short hours later, some time after 4 a.m., he cut her throat while she slept. There were no signs of a struggle, and her attitude was that of someone at rest when she was found. He then sought to remove all physical evidence of his association with Dimmock. He may have removed other postcards and items which could incriminate him. It will never be known, but we know that if he did so, he did not find the Rising Sun postcard because Phyllis Dimmock had not yet placed it in her album, but had concealed it in the lining of a drawer. He was therefore obliged to leave the crime scene, perhaps hoping that the postcard, whose importance he understood very well, had been destroyed. When it surfaced and was reproduced in the press, he sought to silence those who would recognize his handwriting and to produce a false alibi. As Wood left the apartment, carefully locking the bedroom and apartment doors, he was seen by McGowan. He may have been aware that he had been seen, but as he walked in the opposite direction to McGowan, would have presumably felt that identification was impossible. But McGowan's attention was piqued by the unusual walk, which appears to have been a characteristic of Wood's, and which enabled McGowan to identify Robert Wood in the police lineup. Many writers and commentators on the case, in the years since Wood's acquittal in 1907, have hinted at Wood's guilt. They have been constrained from writing freely because Wood was presumably still alive, had been found not guilty at the Old Bailey. Marshall Hall himself came to believe that Wood had been guilty. Now, many years since Wood's death, it may well be possible to say that Robert Wood got away with murder. After the trial, Robert Wood disappeared from public view. Many have speculated since that he changed his name, possibly emigrated, but he didn't. In fact, he resumed his artistic work using other names and became a very successful children's illustrator. He married in 1915, but he and his wife, Annie, had no children and lived in a Chelsea Embankment apartment for most of the rest of his life, until his death in 1969, at the age of 92.